The courtroom buzzed with whispers and restless shuffling as the next case was called. Fluorescent lights cast a cold glow over the grey walls, and the bailiff's voice echoed through the juvenile court. A small, pale girl stepped forward. She couldn't have been older than 13. Her clothes hung loose on her frame, and her worn sneakers squeaked softly against the polished floor. Her eyes, though her eyes held something different, they were quiet, watchful, far too old for someone so young. Her name was Ella. She stood alone at the defense table, hands clasped in front of her, while the public defender flipped through a thin case file. It wasn't the first time Ella had been here. Shoplifting, again. A few granola bars, a small flashlight, and a bottle of water. The clerk had chased her out of the store, and she'd been caught just down the block, sitting calmly on a bench, waiting. Judge Robert Halbrook glanced over his glasses, already tired of the routine. He was known for being strict, sharp, and unforgiving, especially with repeat offenders. He sighed and leaned forward. "Miss Ella Harper," he said, voice firm, "do you have anything to say for yourself?" The courtroom stilled. Most kids either cried or stayed silent. Some argued. Ella didn't do any of that. Instead, she looked up, locking eyes with the judge. Her voice was quiet, but steady. "I can read your mind." A ripple of laughter moved through the small crowd in the back. Even the bailiff raised an eyebrow. The judge leaned back in his chair, his expression a mix of amusement and irritation. "Is that so?" he said with a dry chuckle. "Well, that's a first. Go on then. Tell me what I'm thinking." Ella didn't blink. She just tilted her head slightly, her voice dropping lower. "You're thinking this is nonsense, that I'm just another broken kid trying to dodge the consequences. But you're also wondering why you haven't had that dream in 2 nights. The one with the wooden stairs and the broken watch. And the crying. The same crying you've heard since you were 9. The room went silent. The judge froze, color draining from his face. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. The laughter had stopped. The air felt heavier. Ella didn't smile. She just stood there, looking into the eyes of a man who had built his whole life trying to forget. For a moment, no one in the courtroom moved. The judge's fingers, which had been lightly drumming the bench, fell still. His gaze was fixed on Ella, and something in his face had shifted. Disbelief, maybe even fear. The crowd in the gallery, mostly lawyers and tired social workers, looked around uncomfortably, unsure if this was a strange act or something far more serious. Ella remained calm, her eyes never leaving his. "You still have the watch," she said softly. "It doesn't tick anymore, but you kept it. It was your sister's, wasn't it?" The judge swallowed hard. His throat clicked as he tried to find words, but none came. The bailiff stepped forward instinctively, sensing something was off. But the judge raised a hand without taking his eyes off the girl. "How do you know that?" he finally asked, voice low, almost hoarse. Ella's voice didn't waver. "Because it's still with you. Not just in your drawer. It's in your mind, your chest, right here like a weight you never put down." She tapped her own heart with a single finger. The silence in the room deepened. It wasn't dramatic anymore. It was uneasy, heavy. Every person could feel something shift in the air, like the sound of truth cutting through noise. A few in the gallery exchanged glances, unsure of what they were witnessing. Ella stepped forward once. "You couldn't save her. You were just a kid, but you've never forgiven yourself." The judge's hands gripped the edge of the bench. His knuckles turned white. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "That's not in any report, not in any file." Ella shook her head gently. "I don't read minds like a magician or a psychic. I feel pain. I feel guilt, grief, shame. They cling to people. Some carry it so long it becomes louder than their thoughts." His eyes brimmed with something unexpected vulnerability. He stared at her, and for the first time in decades, Judge Halbrook didn't feel like the one in control. "Who are you?" he asked, more to himself than to her. Ella didn't answer. She just stepped back, as if the point had been made. The room remained frozen, and in that strange, still moment, it was no longer about a stolen flashlight or a juvenile case. It was about a secret the judge had buried in silence for more than 40 years, and a girl who somehow, impossibly, had brought it to light. Later that afternoon, long after the courtroom had emptied and the noise had died down, Judge Halbrook sat alone in his chambers, the door shut behind him. His robe was folded over a chair. His shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. The polished wooden walls that once gave him comfort now felt like they were closing in. He stared at the small photo on his desk, a faded picture of 2 children sitting on a porch, legs dangling, both smiling. One of them was him, the other his sister, Emma, gone since he was 9. A memory he'd kept locked so tightly that even saying her name out loud had become unbearable. There was a knock at the door. It opened slowly, and Ella stepped in. Guided by the bailiff, who didn't say a word, just nodded and left them alone. Halbrook looked at her in a way he hadn't looked at anyone in years. Not like a judge, not like a man above her, just a person, facing someone who somehow saw straight through him. "Sit," he said quietly. Ella moved to the chair opposite his desk, folding her hands in her lap. She didn't look nervous. She looked like she'd been here before, like she knew how people's sadness felt behind closed doors. He cleared his throat. "How did you know all that? Not just the dreams, the exact details. The feeling, the sound of her crying." "I haven't spoken her name out loud since I was a child." Ella studied him for a moment. "I didn't know it. Not like facts. I felt it. I don't know how to explain it exactly. When someone's pain is heavy enough, it leaks. Most people pretend they're fine. They wear nice suits and sit behind big desks. But the pain, it's still there, and it sticks to the air around them." The judge leaned back, his voice quieter now. "You shouldn't have to carry that. You're just a kid." "So were you," she said, meeting his gaze. "But you still carry yours." For a long while neither of them spoke. He looked at her with something closer to awe than judgment. "You're not trying to manipulate anyone, are you?" he asked. Ella shook her head. "I try to help, but no one listens. They just see a girl who steals food. I only take what I need, and I only speak when it matters." Halbrook let the silence linger. Then, for the first time in a very long time, he spoke the name again. "Emma," he said. Ella smiled softly. "She forgave you a long time ago. You just never forgave yourself." That evening, Judge Halbrook sat at his desk long after the courthouse had closed. Papers were scattered everywhere, case files, transcripts, placement reports, things he'd never bothered to read closely before. All of them were about Ella. Foster home after foster home, complaints of her being too quiet, too strange, emotionally unavailable, notes from social workers, most of them resigned and clinical. No signs of theft until recently. No evidence of violence, just a girl who had slipped through the cracks. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. He couldn't stop hearing her voice, the certainty in it when she spoke of things no one else could see. She hadn't accused or begged. She hadn't asked for sympathy. She had simply held up a mirror and he'd seen the part of himself he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten it still bled. But he picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It rang twice. Before someone answered, Dr. Lillian Reyes said, a calm, familiar voice. "It's Robert Halbrook," he said, almost unsure of how to begin. "I need a favor, a big one." There was a pause. "That's not something you usually say. I met a girl today," he said slowly. "She reminded me of things I thought I'd buried. She needs help, but not the kind the system gives. She doesn't need to be locked up or bounced to another stranger's house. She needs someone who won't be afraid of her silence." Dr. Reyes didn't ask for details. She didn't need them. Years ago, she had helped him face the grief that had quietly shaped his entire life. She had walked with him through the darkest corridors of memory. And now, without hesitation, she agreed. By the next morning, Judge Halbrook signed an emergency motion dismissing Ella's charges. He contacted social services and arranged a new placement under Dr. Reyes' care. When he called Ella in to tell her, she didn't smile right away. She just studied him. "Why?" she asked quietly. He looked at her with eyes no longer guarded. "Because you saved me from myself yesterday. Let me try to return the favor." Ella's gaze softened. For once, someone had seen beyond the case file, beyond the silence, beyond the things she couldn't explain. For the first time in her life, someone believed her and believed in her. A few weeks later, the early morning sun poured gently over the quiet park near the edge of the city. Children's laughter echoed in the distance, birds flitted between branches, and the hum of life moved softly through the air. On a weathered wooden bench beneath a tall oak tree, Ella sat beside Dr. Reyes, a sketchpad open in her lap. Her shoes were cleaner now, her clothes brighter, her hair neatly brushed and tied. But more than that, something had changed in her eyes. They no longer looked lost, they looked alive. She sketched with light, careful strokes a tree, a house, a figure on a staircase. Dr. Reyes sat reading beside her, saying nothing, just letting the silence be warm for once. Ella looked up from the page and took in the peacefulness around her. For the first time in years, maybe ever, she felt safe, not just in a place, but with a person. The kind who didn't talk too much or ask the wrong questions. The kind who listened even when you didn't speak. A soft breeze brushed through the branches above them, scattering a few leaves onto the path. Ella watched them drift, then turned back to her drawing. Across the park, sitting quietly on a distant bench, Judge Halbrook watched from behind his sunglasses. He didn't approach, he didn't want to disturb what was unfolding. He just needed to see her free, not in handcuffs or a courtroom, but here, surrounded by sunlight and open sky. Ella saw him. She didn't wave, but she met his gaze and nodded once. It was enough. He nodded back. She turned to Dr. Reyes and whispered, "He looks lighter." Dr. Reyes followed her eyes, then smiled. "Maybe he is." Ella closed the sketch pad and leaned back against a bench. She wasn't trying to read anyone's pain today. She was just being, and for the first time in her life, that was enough. A voice echoed gently in her memory, his voice, shaking and quiet, saying thank you in that moment. She understood something no courtroom ever taught her. Pain makes people hard, but kindness unexpected. Undeserved kindness makes them whole again. And somewhere in the quiet of the morning, a wound began to heal. Not just for her, but for everyone who had forgotten what it meant to be seen and still loved.